WNST, business of sports with this guy. He is the longtime Orioles front office man back in the 80s, and I've been doing some research on Hank Peters, amongst other stuff, going back into the 80s. He is Marty Conway, the current sports professor at Georgetown after a stint with the Texas Rangers and AOL and a whole bunch of other places. He joins us now. You can follow him out on LinkedIn at Marty Conway, as well as out on Twitter at Marty Conway. Dude, it's been a month, and it's amazing with you and I because a month has gone by. We've had World Cup finals, right? We've had all of that go on for Croatia and France and all that stuff. I was up in New York on Bastille Day watching the French play. We've had the Orioles have a legitimate fire sale. We've seen the Ravens open camp now with fans out on the fields out there. But I don't think anything trumps the All-Star game here locally and what it represented for baseball. And then the backside of that where Machado was the centerpiece of the Washington, D.C. All-Star game, even more so than Bryce Harper on a national level, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think all eyes were on, Manny, and the Orioles wanted to, selfishly, frankly, I think, and properly, they wanted him to play the game in an Orioles uniform because if he didn't, I'm not sure they would have replaced him with an Oriole. Who knows? So they wanted to see him play the game in an Orioles uniform, get all that publicity, get all that attention, and then clearly they were fully prepared to announce the trade and move on the day after the All-Star game. So they got their 15 minutes of fame as a part of it in an otherwise, historically bad season. And so check the box and then move on.
Marty, I'm going to start this, and I'm going to open up a can of worms with you, and I'm going to piss off some listeners, and, it's fine. I parked my car in D.C. I drove down on Monday morning for the workout, and I parked my car out in center field 3 blocks away, and I paid my $30 or whatever. And I walked up half street to the front entrance, and I turned around. And there was all sorts of buzz going on. It was 100 degrees. It was the workout day. I remember that day in Baltimore, as I'm sure you do vividly, back in 1993 when we had the Fan Fest at the Convention Center and the harbor was all abuzz in Fort McHenry and Geddy Lee was walking around, at the All-Star Gala at the buffet and whatnot. And I flash forward 25 years later, not only am I in Washington, D.C., Washington, that was never going to have a team because, they couldn't support the Senators back then, and they lost baseball twice. Washington it's a transient town, and they ain't never going to support baseball down there, Marty, and that's why the Orioles ain't never going down there. I walked up to the center field entrance. There's people everywhere. It's 11:30 in the morning. And I looked up. And, Marty, when I got up into the press box, I counted the cranes. There are 10 cranes in the sky. I chatted with Tom Boswell between the American League and the National League availability. He said there was some international study and some thing that neighborhood is one of the top 10 neighborhoods in the world, one of the hottest neighborhoods in the world. It's got a subway station. It's got the Pentagon on one side. It's got the Navy Yard on the other side. It's no longer Anacostia where no one lives and they bury dead bodies and they dump trash into the river. It's something there, and for the first time ever, I walked into the stadium. I walked up top. I looked out. Its stadium was empty, but the cranes were there. And I thought to myself, the Edward Bennett Williams version of you and the Larry Lucchino version of you and the younger version of you 30 years ago would look at this and say, how are we going to keep the Orioles 10 or 15 years from now? If that's going to be the Yankees of the region, and I'm fully convinced it's going to be, I'm very, very concerned about the future of the Baltimore Orioles, Marty.
Well, you hit on a lot of things there, and yes, number one, Washington is a top 10 global city, not just a top 10 U.S. city, et cetera. It's a top 10 global city. London, France, Tokyo, Paris, et cetera. Washington is right in that mix, and then secondly, that location, because I know many of the people that worked on this process way back in the early 2000s. That location was hand-selected as the location that would be the centerpiece of just what you're seeing now, although the Great Recession of 2008, 9, and 10 pushed that development back several years. But you're seeing now the benefits of literally putting the ballpark there, all of the because remember, Washington is a government town, and so from a real estate perspective, you've got the transportation department down there. You've got a lot of other sort of inside baseball businesses, if you will, and then what's grown up around that has been the private sector, which includes contractors and now getting mixed retail, which on the bottom level is retail, and above it is housing, residential above it. So it was handpicked. And if you would have turned around, if you could have in the press box and turned around and looked out the back, you'd see that DC United Stadium.
I did see that. I saw that when I took the elevator down with Eric Fisher and Barry Bloom, and I looked out and I'm like, that looks like the thing I see when I'm on the Amtrak going up to New York when I pass the Red Bulls thing coming out of Newark. And that's also basically on the subway stop as well. I mean, they did a nice job down there, and all of a sudden I look at the Orioles and say, we are the Oakland A's. We are the armpit of this relationship. We are the weaker. We're the White Sox. We're not the Cubs. We're the Mets. We're not the Yankees. And once the money gets level set, and whoever Peter's heirs are, and they level set this thing and make the franchises fair again, the Orioles in Baltimore are in a lot of trouble, Marty.
Well, it's going to be. It is, and it will continue to be a challenge. The thing that the Orioles have going for them, of course, always is Oriole Park at Camden Yards, which loves to be filled by people from Boston and New York and Philadelphia and other places like that. But so two things. Number one, they have a challenge because of the Nationals and because of what's happened in and around. And then number two, just the general business practices. They're going to have to do what Steve Jobs did 25 years ago, which is leapfrog and realize that there are certain places that Apple had lost and fallen behind Microsoft, and there were other areas that had yet to be discovered that they had to invest in. And so that's why you have iTunes, and that's why you had iPods and different things like that. And so that's what it's going to take, is not just a fast follow, not just to have the same things that happen in Washington, but to do that. And so between they and the Ravens, they're finding themselves in a marketplace here that all around it to the south has grown up, and to the extent that that is absorbed by either the Redskins or Nationals or now the Caps and Wizards, that sport marketing in Baltimore is a different game going forward, and it's basically game on. And I share some of the concern that you have because I think from an attendance position, it's going to be really difficult. And we've already seen what they've done with media. So those are two of the big revenue sources along with corporate sponsorship, and they have their work cut out for them just even to be competitive. So we'll see what happens.
Marty, if I am a national guy and you don't know me and we don't go to Amici's and have a meatball together once in a while, and I just called you from Forbes or I called you from Sports Business Journal, and I would say, Marty, you've been around this for 40 years. Are the Baltimore Orioles in trouble long-term, 15 years from now? Is there a chance Manny Machado would be playing out the string in Nashville, visiting the Orioles, or Portland or Montreal or some other place? I have never had that feeling. I never believed that. It took 12 years of the Nationals, and now that I've been down there, now that I've been in that upper deck, now that I ride the Washington subway, now that I've attended a Washington Capitals rally, on the mall with 500,000 people, many of them wearing the Washington Nats hat, which looks like a Walgreens logo to me, I begin to really wonder the feasibility of the Baltimore Orioles, no Fortune 500 companies being squeezed in here once the media thing gets level set. The Nationals, to me, Marty, and I don't, my father would roll over in his grave, and certainly it pains me to have my lungs even say this to you, but it feels like they've been there forever, and that's a pretty scary thing.
Yeah, well, all things evolve, and that's, like I said, you have to deal in the future. You can't deal in the past, which is something that from time to time Baltimore gets stuck in, which is they love to relive their sports history, but you got to really focus on your sport future. As I said, the bigger concern there is what they're going to do about the, receding corporate levels in and around Baltimore. Now, I happen to think that there's still a very, very solid market of Oriole support. But what it's going to take is they're going to have to get out into those Montgomery County suburbs, into the Anne Arundel County suburbs, where some of that government-connected business is, and fight back really hard, as well as their their natural corridor. I was up in Pennsylvania over the weekend, and there's still a natural corridor up 83 for Orioles. They have radio affiliates up there. They have things like that. But they're going to have to work harder than they've ever worked, probably just to get back to 2 million fans.
Well, if you're a 15-year-old boy playing baseball in Columbia or Laurel or Annapolis or Crofton or wherever, you would have, Josh Hader was one of the big stories last week, right?
Yep.
I mean, grew up in Millersville. That kid's an Oriole fan all day long, all of our lives, except not anymore. Yep. That kid's now a Nationals fan, and that's a real problem here, I think. Real problem.
Yeah, and also the fact that the Nationals are in the National League, and so they're going to routinely bring in the Dodgers and Cubs and teams like that, which have a natural, sort of national following. So you're going to see the difference in attendance all the time. Yes, is it going to be a challenge? It's going to be a problem. It's going to be a challenge for them. We'll just have to see how they approach it going forward. They're going to have to be way more aggressive and creative than they are right now. And but again, the other thing I would close by saying is just all those cities that you mentioned in terms of the potential for where does baseball go. There's two things. Number one, I don't think any of those cities rival what Camden Yards could be. They'd have to build an incredible experience there. And number two, if you've observed this, you've watched Tampa Bay and Oakland sit for however long with the idea that, we're going to build a stadium, I think that Major League Baseball wants to preserve two of those markets that you mentioned for expansion some way. That's how the owners pay themselves. So do I think baseball will leave Baltimore during that time? I think it's highly unlikely, but I do think they've got their challenges. And yes, you started to mention some of the franchises, whether it's the White Sox or the Oakland A's, or other organizations like that, where they are now a part of because of what has happened with the Nationals. And yes, Peter Angelos made that famous comment about 15 years ago that there are no baseball fans, there are no real baseball fans in Washington. Well, he clearly missed the mark on that and didn't understand it. And now the All-Star Game was their final jewel in that development. That's why you saw all of that construction happening. It's because everybody was shooting for in and around the All-Star Game, and now it's going to be game on with the development of their stadium around there. And hats off to them. That's what baseball saw when they moved from Montreal. It's taken a little longer than they thought, but I think they've gotten the marketplace they thought they were going to get.
Marty Conway is our guest. You can follow him out on LinkedIn at Marty Conway and, of course, out on Twitter as well. All of our WNST programming brought to you by our friends at Royal Farms. Real fresh, real fast. And the coffee, make sure you're downloading the Rofo app and you're using that when you're pumping your gas. Get your rewards, get your coffee, get your Western fries and fried chicken. I cheated and had a little fried chicken down at the Nursery Road, Royal Farms down at Linthicum, picking my wife up. So that's become my favorite Royal Farms, the one by BWI. Also, our friends at Michael's Cafe up in Timonium with the live music out on the decks. Enjoy the sunsets out there as well as the crab cakes and the delicious prime-aged steak and the fantastic bar. If you haven't been to Michael's in a while, stop by, say hello. It's great summer at Michael's Cafe in Timonium where those crab cakes are still delicious. Marty Conway is our guest, longtime Orioles front office person, and then off to the Texas Rangers, now the sports business professor at Georgetown down in D.C. You drive in and out of the district all the time, Marty, and this All-Star game and what it represents and Bryce Harper's role in it, and now they're going to be in a pennant race here the rest of the way. But for Mike Trout on the backside of this, for Bryce Harper on the backside of this, for Manny Machado to be dealt off to the Dodgers in a rental, and now the Orioles are sort of this barren cupboard at this point once Britton and maybe Adam Jones get out of here by the end of the week. But there was a question about marketing baseball, and Rob Manfred popped off about Mike Trout. Obviously, Harper and Machado were going to find their value. I know you've read my Dear Orioles letters, and I think one of the issues with Manny Machado was you were never going to put him on the side of a building here and sell tickets in the way that Cal Ripken did that, or in the way that even Eddie Murray sold tickets, or I don't know that the Brooks Robinson ever sold tickets, or Jim Palmer, because the word is the Orioles didn't sell tickets in the 60s and 70s. But that's for you to argue. But in the modern era, baseball doesn't have that guy I've got to go pay to see play. Maybe Ohtani was that guy for a minute. I remember Fernando Mania and any number of things. Ripken was certainly that guy. McGuire and Sosa. But over the course of our lifetime, when Nolan Ryan pitched, I would go out on the 33rd Street or whatever, and I probably had more of a baseball Jones than other people to watch Doc Gooden or Darryl Strawberry in their prime. But, the Trout thing being thrown out by the commissioner this week, that was a little bit out of bounds, I thought. I don't think there's anything wrong with Mike Trout's brand. I think the brand of baseball has a problem because everything's a strikeout or a homer, and the games are too long, and the game's old and white. And that's not Mike Trout's fault.
Yeah, I think Rob Manfred mishandled that entire situation when asked about a player and, what's his role or responsibility or et cetera, et cetera. So there's a couple things on that. Number one, I think that the first thing is, if baseball were to go to Mike Trout and ask him to participate or support whatever, why would Mike Trout or his representatives say yes to anything that baseball has? Like, there has been no blockbuster marketing program, and I look at blockbuster programs like that you saw on TV, like when SportsCenter did these "This is SportsCenter" commercials, where they used to get athletes in there all the time, and athletes and their agents were raising their hand and couldn't wait to get in those because they were so popular. Baseball has none of that, so there was nothing for Mike Trout or his representatives to say yes to. So that's number one. Number two, Mike Trout is interested and should be interested in building his brand if he wants to, and not the brand of Major League Baseball unless they're going to pay him quite a bit of money. Number three, if you look at the other sports, and I know people always reference basketball and the NBA when they talk about marketing and player marketing. Look, the reality of that is, from Michael Jordan to LeBron James to Kevin Durant, et cetera, those have been supported and fueled by, sneaker companies and Gatorade drink type companies and McDonald's. Those are the companies that have built the brands of those people. The NBA and others didn't do that. Major League Baseball and baseball in general doesn't have that. They don't have Nike and Under Armour and McDonald's and Gatorade doing high-dollar promotions with their players, which bring them on television to the point where you don't have to put any subtitle underneath to know who it is.
I walked through a supermarket in Baltimore, and I barely, other than a potato chip that might have an Oriole logo on it or whatnot, I don't see Manny Machado greeting me on a soft drink can at the front door, nor do I see Mike Trout or Bryce Harper when I'm in the D.C. suburbs. I'll tell you what, the Capitals have done a nice job lately, at least, of... I go places and I see things and I see players associated with pizza or soft drinks or, in the old days it was beer and cigarettes 100 years ago, right? But that would be part of this. Joe Flacco's on billboards around here after he won a Super Bowl. Justin Tucker's on my coffee cup with Royal Farms, right? Like, that's a pretty standard part of what you do. Baseball doesn't do that well.
Anyway. Well, they don't do it at all. And again, to your point, Cal Ripken had hot dogs, he had relationships, milk, things like that. You have to, and that's what we did. You have to make an effort to do that. Number one, you have to get a player and their representative who want to be cooperative and do it. Cal wanted to do it. Eddie didn't want to do it. That's fine.
A very difficult thing to do when Chris Davis is already making $24 million to say, here's $100,000 to go be able to be on a billboard. Unless it's a dog or a cat or something he feels like he wants to do, most of those guys don't want to mess with that when they got $100 million in the bank. They don't. Right?
Yeah, I get that, and I understand that. But we've done deals in the past, and I've seen the Mets do it in the past, other things where they go to a franchise-type player, and they literally make it a part of that contract, right? Look, we're going to now pay you $15, $18, $20 million a year, but here's what we're looking for. Not just a charity appearance, not just something on television, but we want to set you up with one or two of our sponsors who we know are part of that. And you can buy out a player's category rights to certain sponsorship areas, and you can do that. That's if you want to. Most organizations aren't really interested in doing that. They lose the momentum. But back to the Mike Trout scenario. So Mike Trout doesn't owe Major League Baseball anything. In fact, look, not every time is your best, quote-unquote, best player, you're also your most commercially marketable player. When the San Antonio Spurs were winning it all in the NBA, it was Tim Duncan and David Robinson. They weren't doing anything out of San Antonio, right? They were not national names. Dirk Nowitzki, when the Mavericks won it, he wasn't a national brand, right? So I think it sometimes gets overblown by the media as to what has to be done. Look, baseball has enough on their plate to do their own branding campaign. I did this count the other day when I was having a conversation. There are 256 affiliates of Major League Baseball teams spread around the country. Every Major League Baseball team has 6 to 7 affiliates from Aberdeen to Bowie to you name it, right? And then if you count the independent baseball teams, whether it's the Southern Maryland Blue Crabs or Lancaster, places like that, there's another 65. You're talking about almost 325 professional baseball organizations outside of Major League Baseball. So you can't tell me that Major League Baseball, as the grantor of franchises like a Buffalo Wild Wings or somebody else, can't develop a branding campaign and then go place that around the country in all those places, because now you're talking about almost all 50 states, so that when you walk into one of those places, you're immediately hit with a baseball, which clearly everybody's going to see Major League Baseball as the top of that branding campaign, right? So what they've done is they've basically outsourced marketing to their franchises. Major League Baseball just does the marketing for the All-Star Game, the playoffs, and the World Series, which, oh, by the way, almost always sell out. So they don't really have a sharp object when it comes to marketing. But they could do what Starbucks does, what McDonald's does, what all those big brands do, is a branding campaign across the country that then gets supported by their local affiliates, and you'd see that sort of consistency.
But who wants to associate with baseball? Well, why would Starbucks want baseball in their brand in 10,000 locations? I mean, and then pay to do it. I mean, it's a fascinating thing to figure out who would think baseball is sexy at this point. Who wants to market to old white people? Because that's what it is. I mean, if baseball comes in and says, here's our fan base, do you want to market to them? They'll say, yeah, we'll market, reverse mortgages or so. I don't know. Like, I'm wondering who wants to associate, who wants Mike Trout's cutout standing, or Manny Machado or Bryce Harper, in front of their store, in front of their chicken shack, or in front of their burger stand, or their whatever the place would be,
Well, keep this in mind, right? So on the media side, and I'll give you this comparison, and then you can think about it from there. On the media side, you have networks talking all the time about where they stand, right? And one of the knocks against CBS is that they have an older audience, right? They have a lot during the day. They have a lot of older people watching. They have shows like The Big Bang Theory and a few others. CBS's marketing mantra, is America's most watched network, right? They aggregate all that together under the theme of America's most watched network, and they sell advertising and advertisers around that theme, right? That we have the most eyeballs. The NBC, on the other hand, goes in a different direction and says, we have the money demographic of 18 to 34, 18 to 49, et cetera, right? We have that demographic. NBC is like the NBA. The NBA talks about their money demographic all the time. Major League Baseball could be like CBS. There's almost 75 million people that go in and see a Major League Baseball game. And then, like I said, if you aggregate those 250-some affiliates alone, now you're talking about almost 100 million people go to a baseball game per year. And yes, there are airlines, there are all kinds of snack foods, there are all kinds of people like that who want the aggregation in the summer of that many people. So when I say, I understand what you're saying about, old white people, but CBS has been making a living off of America's most watched network for a decade. And it's really all in how you put this together and present it to people. But there is no sport that can even come close to baseball. The NBA is second in terms of attendance, and they're at 22 million. And Major League Baseball is at 75. So, they don't pay me to do that, but I'm just saying that there is an opportunity out there for baseball to represent themselves as a brand that they can then cascade down all throughout, instead of what they do now, which is essentially say throughout the summer, you know what, Dodgers, you guys do your thing, Orioles, you do your thing. It is their responsibility to bring people to the front door, but under the banner of what, right? If you look at the great brands, whether they be Apple, Google, others, you see you generally come up with about 3 words that define them, right? If you watch an Xfinity commercial, you'll see the 3 words, speed, whatever it is. What are the 3 words that associate with Major League Baseball? They should define it on their terms, not on the terms like you just mentioned, which are old white people, but I think there's something to that. Why they don't do that, and why Rob Manfred says, well, we think Mike Trout could do this if he wanted, that's why I say Rob Manfred knows as much about marketing as I know about baking, which is basically to get somebody else to do it. Right?
He is Marty Conway. You can find him out on Twitter as well as on LinkedIn. He doesn't write often enough, but when he does, you should read it. It's all, of course, brought to you here at WNST by our friends at Freedmont Mortgage. Don't make a 30-year mistake by choosing the wrong lender. You need the right lender. That's Carl Delmont and our friends. He'll be joining us this week, of course, on the backside of all things soccer. You can get your Freedmont education at Freedmont.com, whether you're buying, selling, or just thinking about it, Freedmont.com. Also, King Discount Liquors, lottery beer, booze, and the best prices in Baltimore. Get over to Rosedale and give the King a ring. They have suspended my Free the Birds T-shirt from the commercials there. Apparently, the Orioles think they own the trademark to Free the Birds, which is sort of hilarious. Getting back onto the Orioles with you, Marty. The Machado thing, and who do they put on the side of the warehouse? And we do go back, now that we're in the middle of this and Machado's gone, there's still a whole lot more business to be transacted, a whole lot more bad 100-loss baseball to play, and we're still in that scenario where what are they going to do long-term? Who's going to be on this team next year? And what are they going to have to market and sell people in the offseason, Marty?
I think they'll revert back to where they normally go, which is they'll revert back to the ballpark itself, right, which is the affordability, the accessibility. But look, they've got other things that they've got to get on top of, which is, we didn't talk about this, but I'm sure you've commented on it, and that is the Ravens have gone to a digital ticketing platform, right, and they've had some early indications. We'll see how that goes when they actually have to bring people to the ballpark, but those kinds of things where they're going to have to shift the attention away from, for a period of time, who particularly is wearing the uniform and on the field, and back to their own brand and their own experience, and that is to make it a better experience for season ticket holders, for people coming in for 1, 2, or 3 games, and to get out to the community and to build that sort of infrastructure. So I think that's probably where they're going to have to pivot back to, which isn't necessarily a message about this player, that player, or even the manager. They're going to have to go back to where they know, which is they're going to have to go back to the ballpark, but they should be going back to innovating and coming up with different kinds of platforms for buying tickets and experiencing the ballpark, because ultimately, no matter who's wearing the uniform, they have to make those adjustments anyhow. Now, it remains to be seen. They've got somebody new coming in to head up the business affairs, if you will, to see if that's the direction that they take. But clearly they have enough needs that they've fallen far, far behind other experiences. And now that the Ravens have gone to a digital ticketing platform, if that's successful, then I think the Orioles are going to have to feel like they're going to have to move sooner than later, because once somebody moves in the marketplace, it becomes more difficult for others to stay with an old platform. Now, do
that's
some
never stopped the Orioles before, Marty.
Do some people want paper tickets? Yes, absolutely, and you're going to have to reserve that right for people. But at some point, you're going to have to make it easier for younger people to get and have access and move their tickets around. That's where the Ravens are going, and I think that's ultimately where the Orioles will have to go, whether they see it now or they see it in a year from now.
Marty, I was up in New Jersey last week seeing Sticks with my wife after it was the day that France won the World Cup. They were playing in the Homedale Shed up there just outside of New York. I'd never been. Lovely, lovely drive on the Garden State. I'm embarrassed it took me 50 years to get there, but I went out and I bought the ticket online, on a secondary site, and when I opened the ticket digitally, it said on the PDF, you must print this ticket. You must print this ticket. And I'm sort of urinating down my leg because it's 6:25 and I'm out in the middle of the woods, and I'm thinking, and then my wife and I open the trunk of the car, and we're having a cocktail and eating some fried chicken we bought on the turnpike, and there's 3 really cute young girls on the, look like your daughter, quite frankly, 21, 22, 23-year-old girls drinking beer, and I said to them, do you guys have printed tickets? And they laughed at me, They're like, look at the old guy over there, thinks you have to print the tickets. And I'm like, well, it says so that you have to print them. They're like, we're getting in, our tickets are on our phone, and we're, and I'm thinking, well, if these 23-year-old girls are getting in, I shouldn't be so concerned, but I don't know why they try to intimidate you as to, your barcode won't get you in, that you'd have to, run out to the FedEx Kinko and print your thing. When I don't understand the ticketing. I think for old people like you and me, they do the most they can do to sort of confound us. When the thing's sitting on my phone, I want to be a young guy and use it, but don't intimidate me like that,
Yeah, well, some of it comes down to the infrastructure. You have to completely change your infrastructure to do this. You have to have more readers, barcode readers, all kinds of other things like that. And ultimately, like I said, there's a couple of companies, Ticketmaster and one or two other, SeatGeek, whatever, who are literally strangleholding the venues and now some of the ball clubs to do this. And so there's a lot more going on behind the scenes. It's not like each organization can choose to do what they want. There's very few providers now. The market isn't expanding, it's actually contracting. But at the end of the day, it's like having a rotary phone in your house. Some people wanted to hang on to it until the phone company said, no, you can't do it any longer. So venues, ballparks, organizations like that are going to have more than one way for people to get in, because people experience their ticketing experience in more than one way. Now, again, I think this is a new frontier for Baltimore. The NFL has mandated that their clubs, by the end of the 2019 season, have to be on a digital platform, and I think that's why some clubs have been on it for a year or two. I think that's why the Ravens are going to it now, trying to work out some of the kinks throughout the beginning of this season, so that by the time the NFL has mandated that they'll be there. Baseball has not done that. Major League Baseball has not mandated to any of its clubs where they need to be by a certain time, but I think they're absolutely encouraging people to get to that sooner than later, because, yes, many people do experience it. But you do have to reserve, for purposes of ADA and other legal principles, the ability to have people still enter with printed tickets.
All right, last and most importantly, we're playing the Arena Bowl here this week at the Royal Farms Arena, Marty. You know, arena football, and you know, say what you will about Ted and doing this thing, and you know, obviously the crowds have not been there, and it's weird with the guy owning the league and owning the teams and all that stuff, but Ted's tried to keep the thing alive, and I don't know why some things work and some things don't. I don't know why lacrosse is not sort of caught on. I don't know why it's taken so long for MLS and these buildings, and it still doesn't come to most citizens, certainly in Baltimore, the MLS. But the arena football, I mean, I've been watching that on TV for years and years, and here we have a team, and again, it goes back to marketing, and do people want to be inside? Do they want to be at the Royal Farms Arena on a July Saturday? I don't know. It is an exciting product when you watch it. It's certainly not bad football. It's different football.
Yeah, and that's the point. So, and again, the Arena Bowl, I think Ted has done a really good job of reserving this to see if it can survive and what the future is. And I know what's on his mind and the minds of his folks that are running it, and that is, this is an opportunity to be innovative, creative. I do honestly think that he believes that once legalized gambling comes into various states, that they will be able to do things in games that actually promote or inspire, frankly, people to bet on the outcomes of certain things in arena football. And so whether that's a year from now, whether that's 2 years from now. So it's essentially a streaming it's an opportunity for content for his streaming platform as well. There are a number of reasons why, beyond just the people coming in, watching it on television, can do that. But the overarching point is that if you look back, it's been rare, and I say maybe one or two times, when a football league outside of the National Football League has been successful in this country. And there's this opportunity with football that I guess some people have thought that somewhere between the highest level of college football, the SEC and the Big Ten, and the NFL, that there's an opportunity there. I happen to think it's probably more in the development of a developmental league, and probably not a league that competes directly with the National Football League. And that's why a year from now, when a couple of the new leagues start up, they're actually going to, whether it's the new generation of the XFL or the Football Alliance, they're going to play from February until probably July. Now, I happen to think that if they had a relationship with the NFL as almost a developmental league, like a G League is in basketball, that they probably have a greater chance to be successful than to actually be a standalone platform. But to this point, there's rarely been a standalone football league outside of the NFL that has found itself to be commercially successful. And I think that's what all these leagues are up against. And so Ted is trying to do something on the innovative and creative end, and we'll see if that ultimately can be successful long term. But I think starting next year, you're going to see teams playing football from February until July in some of these other newer leagues that are coming in. And I think you're going to see 3 or 4 sprout up, and we'll see if maybe one of those can survive.
Well, we go back to the World Football League, and we go back, I guess the AFL was that to the NFL in the beginning, and XFL and Vince McMahon, and and these alternate leagues. It's fascinating to me, and this is just my thought on the Arena Football League, with all of the issues of CTE that the NFL has, playing it basically on concrete inside. From an insurance standpoint, I often ponder the future of the NFL, let alone the rest of this. And that's the part that I find to be so curious, that people would be betting, first off, against the NFL, which, seems to be, to your point, over the last 50 years, everyone's lost that battle, including the current president of the United States. Wake me in 48 hours, and I'll let you know if he's still the president or not. But, he found his own dollar battle with the USFL, and Jeff Pearlman's writing the book on that. But in the modern generation, to go up against the NFL, it just seems so sort of counterintuitive. I love a hill charger. I went up against BAL, and 20 years later, I'm still here. So, it can be done, but and I love hill chargers, but I don't know that I'd be a part of that. I don't know that I would do that.
Well, the NFL, look, for all of its CTE, concussion, domestic issues, things like that, the NFL is tightly wrapped in a media cocoon that generates, and you saw it last week with the announcement from the Packers of what their annual finances are, that each team is now getting over $250 million of national money before they even open their gates, sell a ticket, do anything. And so that $8 billion cocoon, which is the National Football League's media packages, insulates them from almost everything else, right? And so it's sort of the massive
money for the Orioles, too. And then the media money can dress up a lot of pigs in sports that look like empty seats. In your era, those would have been empty seats and lost revenue, and you wouldn't have been in business back in the 80s, right?
So there hasn't been another football league that's come along that has had the ability to generate that sort of insulation to be able to last as long as they have. And so that's why I say I think it's increasingly difficult for those organizations to be successful that want to challenge the NFL. I hope somewhere along the line some are successful, but I do think there's a gap, and I do think the NFL and the owners see that this gap and are interested in potentially helping fill it, which is developmental football that brings attention to the NFL. I think Jerry Jones would be happy to have a team in his market, probably playing in his practice facility from February until July, that would help him promote and somehow connect football, the Dallas Cowboys, live football experience, etc. I don't think there's as many organizations that want to see that in the NFL, but I think there are a few. I think Robert Kraft, I think some of the others, when they start to build these really expensive practice facilities that have a decent-sized little football stadium in them, that they would like to see more football in there from February to July, that they have some relationship or control of. I don't think we're going to see that in the next 5 years, but I think 5 to 10 or 15 years, I think you could see one of these new startup leagues morph into something like that, and you'd see some investment from NFL owners on the potential that this could hit. Will it happen? I don't know. But to me, that's the gap in terms of football that could be filled. I don't see a new league coming in the fall, and I don't see a full-blown Major League Football developing in the February-spring window that will ultimately be successful. I just don't see it.
Baltimore Brigade will host the Arena League Championship and Arena Bowl this Saturday night at 7 o'clock down at the Royal Farms Arena. Both are sponsors of WNST.net, so we do appreciate that. Get on down and support the football on Saturday night. Marty, always appreciate your support. I know it's been a month since we got together. I've been doing these Dear Orioles letters, but boy, it is we had a quiet time back in the winter. I remember going out to dinner with you or lunch with you and saying, man, it's quiet around here. Boy, things have certainly picked up around here from a what is there to talk about with the Orioles and the Ravens, not to mention the Nationals and the Capitals and everything else that's going on around here. It's a pretty active summer and plenty of sports on the tongue, I think, right?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, you talked about the All-Star game, what happened with the Caps. Now the Ravens potentially have renaissanced themselves, and so it's just a matter of 8 or 10 months, and things turned around pretty quickly from when the Ravens had dropped out. They were, sort of not in the playoffs. The Orioles were nowhere. And 6 or 7 months later, things have changed, and that's the nature of the commercial opportunities in sports World Cup and others. They're always there. It's just a matter of time before they arrive.
Well, and next time we get together, we'll talk about the coronation of Ray Lewis and what that represents for the Ravens, because you were here when they got off the boat. This is a fascinating thing to be seeing our guys, and Reed will be next, doing these. I'm doing 4 buses out to Canton, Ohio to see a Baltimore legend go into the Hall of Fame. That's such a glimmer in our eyes 25 years ago, but it's all real and it's in front of us while the Orioles are trying to figure out their franchise right now. Marty Conway is the professor of all things sports business down at Georgetown, and of course a lifer sports business marketing person, and always a pleasure to have you on. Great segment, Marty. Thanks for the time.
Okay, thank you very much. Have a good show. Have a good week.
Sorry I missed you down at the All-Star game last week as well. Marty Conway can be found on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and anywhere good sports business conversation is held. One of my all-time favorites. Make sure you're following him out there. Nasty at WNST.net follows me. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram. We stream live out on our buyatoyota.com audio vault. You got the listen live and the vault to listen to what you want, when you want, where you want, as well as AM 1570 as well. Any breaking news when the Orioles deal Zach Britton or Adam Jones or anyone else, you'll get it first. It's all brought to you by our friends at Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. And, of course, Dennis Colatzos will be here on Thursday from 3 until 5, driving you home. It is the SSV on WNST. Our morning newspaper ships to your email inbox each and every morning at 7 a.m. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's always $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life. Move yourself indoor here in the hot summer and get in the best shape of your life. Also, our morning newspaper brought to you by the Maryland Jockey Club and our friends at Laurel, where the sports book is also air-conditioned inside and upgraded and very, very lovely. They're racing this weekend down at Laurel. We'll have the entries on the front of WNST.net as well as in our morning newspaper. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST, Towson, Baltimore. Another Dear Orioles letter coming to Zach Britton and Adam Jones this week at WNST.net, where we never stop talking Baltimore sports.